Welcome to the third session of Office Hours. I'm Joel, your host for these sessions. I am a senior developer educator here at ngrok, and work with the fantastic DevRel and marketing team to produce things such as this. Office Hours is a monthly live stream. We generally go 45 minutes and we answer questions directly from you, our audience of developers and engineers. So like I mentioned a minute ago, when you do register for Office Hours, you have a chance to send us in your question, and that gives me and other people time to answer them live here. So I really encourage you to take that opportunity if you do register for December or January or so on. Please definitely do that. And we'll also take time in this session to answer questions that any of you have and you want to ask live in our chat here. So like I said, I'm Joel, and today I have Russ, who's going to be joining me as the co-host, and I'll let him kind of introduce himself for a moment, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Russ Savage, product manager at ngrok. Been here for about 3 years, ready to answer any and all questions you've got about ngrok. So I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Russ. And Russ joined me on, I think, our very first session that we had. So glad to have you back. It feels like we've done more than three, but here we are. And we also have Jen here, one of our really amazing customer success engineers. Jen's going to be kind of in the background in the chat. We'll be watching the questions that you ask, and kind of identifying the ones that feel like maybe something that we can't answer live. They could be specific to your account or something really unique. Maybe you're hitting a bug that we haven't identified yet. So Jen will be in the chat and we'll DM you with some more information if there's something that we really can't answer live and requires some further investigation. Excellent. So we're gonna start things a little bit differently than we have in our last two sessions. You might have noticed that there's another panelist here that I haven't introduced yet, and we're gonna start by answering a question and getting some answers from a special guest who is Jack. So Jack, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm Jack Britton. I'm on the product-led growth team here at ngrok, and I spend a lot of my time talking to customers, understanding how they are using our products and our features to try to help design better product experiences for everybody. And so I think I'm showing up here in my capacity as somebody who talks to a lot of customers. So yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, so happy to have you. And so like onto the question itself, which was why we were thinking, after the question came in, we really want Jack to be here to help answer it, which came in from Skylar again in the registration form. And the question was, what is the most silly way that ngrok has been used that you know of? Silly is a word, the silly has, many different definitions, but it got us thinking about like, what are some of the more interesting, like just sort of unknown use cases that people are using ngrok for, and just like things you probably wouldn't have thought of as being an ideal use case for ngrok. So as Jack said, he's in lots of conversations with customers looking into like how they're using it. And so we figured Jack would be like the ideal person to talk about, some silly use cases, but also some ones that you probably just have never thought were possible with ngrok. So yeah, Jack, what are some of these, silly, interesting things that you've heard of?
Yeah, so it turns out that ngrok users are very creative and they've integrated us into their stacks for a lot of different things. So the first one that I wanted to bring up is one of our customers that is they're a subscription management tool for car washes. So you might find yourself asking, how can I communicate better with my favorite car wash? I mean, I don't personally, but one of our customers is the answer to that. They connect with point of sale devices within car washes to give the owners of those car washes, as well as the people who visit them, tons of intelligence about how much you're spending at the car wash, and giving them the opportunity to basically giving you the opportunity to like buy a subscription to a car wash. So how does it work? Well, depending on the point of sale service, there may be some kind of, best case scenario, there's like an easily accessible cloud database or some sort of API that our customers can, or that this customer connects into. But most of the time they have to deal with ancient car wash software. So, some of the most common setups that they encounter are like old Firebird databases, if anybody remembers Firebird. And then, in one case, I talked to this customer and they mentioned that it was just a Dell computer sitting in the back office of a car wash in Florida that they had to connect into to get all of that data out into their product. And so what they'll do is they'll remote in to the servers on these machines. They'll install the ngrok config YAML, and then they will set up a TCP address and a port as a service with IP restrictions enabled so that they can then access and ingress into that server to then extract all the data that they need to send it back to their tool. And then afterwards, they do some testing on the YAML, and they continue to manage that connection as a service. They originally were using a tool called NSSM, which some of our users might be familiar with. It's called Non-Sucking Service Manager, and they use that tool to set up the ngrok endpoint as a service. But eventually they moved to just using our ngrok agent subcommand, which is the ngrok service install command, to then just start running those YAMLs as a service. So, yeah,
that's great. I think one of the things that people don't like, I think that gets glossed over really quickly with ngrok is like people think it's always just a tunneling service from localhost to like share the app you're working on, but devices and IoT devices in particular is actually a really big like piece of what ngrok is capable of. Like you can install this lightweight agents anywhere. You just need to like SSH into that place once and install the agent, and then from there, especially if, as you said, like install it as a service, then it's like as robust as the operating system itself. Like if the operating system is up, ngrok will be up, that endpoint will, and that's really helpful. Just that for a lot of people.
For sure. So that's number one. I've got two more that I'll share just briefly. This next one solidly falls into the interesting and awesome bucket for me, at least. So we have a customer who is a nonprofit indigenous radio station in New Zealand that a couple of years back acquired several NVIDIA Tensor Core GPUs to actually train algorithms to run natural language processing on some archives that they had of their ancestral indigenous language, to then basically preserve and then like revitalize that particular their language so it wasn't lost, because some folks might know that 3/4 of the world's languages right now are at risk of extinction, right? At least in terms of the latest numbers from the UN and a number of other places. And so this nonprofit radio station had all of this, this data bank of recordings of their indigenous language. And now they're using all of this to preserve it so that people will be able to speak it. And so they use this for a number of different things. They manage ingress to the pretty standard sort of managing ingress to their like development environment so that they can, continue to make improvements to the product that they're building. They also they manage OAuth access, like security access to their media repos in GitHub. So that, they restrict who can actually access it and work on it. And then they also have a digital platform, like a production app, that they actually manage ingress to, which will enable, and this app for this platform will enable other indigenous tribes to be able to access that same technology that they have to then continue to archive and preserve their own languages eventually. So that to me is solidly just an awesome use case for
Yeah.
how they're using us in a bunch of different ways at the same time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's yeah, kind of the opposite of silly, but it like kind of
Yeah.
gets to that like, that the core of what is really interesting and what is like some really unique kind of chains of infrastructure to solve problems that yeah, would be really difficult otherwise. Like you can imagine that setting up all the networking to be able to access GPUs remotely and everything is like a really big ask, and like
Yeah.
that's years if not a decade or more of networking experience to be able to do that proficiently, and that's just not something that most people have access to. Like
Yeah.
even the coolest Silicon Valley startups struggle to find those people and
And
keep them
the
relevant.
coolest part is that they did it entirely without talking to us initially. Like we reached out after they had already been up and running for a while, which is awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fantastic story of being able to set up an account and self-service the docs or however else they figured it out, and yeah, just be able to do
Yeah.
things without having to talk to sales, which I know is like icky for some people. So
Yeah. Do we have time for one more, or do you want
yeah,
to?
absolutely. Let me just do really quick for those who have just kind of hopped in after we started. We're talking with Jack here about some of the interesting use cases that people are using ngrok for. And if you have a question that you want us to answer, just drop it in the chat and we'll come back to it in a couple minutes. So yeah.
Cool. This next one's a little less silly, but it's really interesting to me. Again, it's more in that interesting bucket. But it's another app that a customer of ours has been building for. We've been working with them for over a year. And the cool thing about this customer is that they are they started out as a very manual process of trying to their goal is to try to give customers access to their app, which was originally in private beta, and it's now in production. But initially, the process of setting up new customers for them was a very manual process. And over time, they've evolved how they use ngrok and how they integrate it into their stack. And so, it's this app that they're building is an in-browser 3D modeling and like image rendering software, which you essentially provide some 3D files and it will create like product images purely from 3D files to then render that for your website or things like that. And initially when we started reaching out to them, they would spin up a new EC2 instance, AWS EC2 instance for each new customer. And then they would tell ngrok to assign a specific endpoint to the EC2 for app access so that their customers could then access their own sort of environment and provide their own 3D files and things. And instead of the EC2 trying to tell the web front end for the app its IP, they just have it map itself to that predefined ngrok subdomain that they've and then they've set up their front end of their app, so it knows to like grab it when a customer auths into the app, which is a really interesting configuration. But also very easy to do with ngrok. Now going forward, as they've evolved their usage over time, the team is like evaluating options to scale to an API-based solution when new customers sign up and create an account. And they're exploring using ngrok, the incoming sort of traffic that they get because they process really large files and they need to sort of have some protections in place. They're evaluating using ngrok as a load balancer, to then sort of make sure that the traffic doesn't, isn't super slow, and that making sure that it's performant. But yeah, that's
Awesome. Thanks so much.
less silly, but cool.
Yeah, but very cool. I'm glad that we have plenty of examples on that side of things. One question: do you know if any of those use cases are if they're using traffic policy at this point? Is that something that you've kind of dug into with them?
So a couple of them have been interested in traffic policy, and they're playing around with different ways of configuring specifically for things like load balancing, some of our random macros that you can you can use, and now it's a new feature that you can actually route new traffic to, route incoming traffic using a traffic policy to split it, however many ways between different endpoints, right? So you could imagine applying a random, 50-50 split for incoming traffic to then apply it to different endpoints. And so that particular customer that's building that app that's concerned about load balancing, they were very interested in using our traffic policy for that.
Fantastic. And that was just that some of those load balancing and like A/B testing things in traffic policy were just introduced, I think maybe a week or two ago, and we're
Yeah.
just getting some of that information out to the general public. But we've got, for customers, we're often back channeling thing and feeding them things that they have been asking for kind of before they are in public beta, let's say, or kind of fully in production. So that's awesome. And Russ, I know that you are often, and thank you, Jen. Jen just dropped the link to that doc in the chat here. Russ, I know that you spend a lot of time, looking into like how people are using ngrok. And I mean, obviously, as a PM, a product manager, you're very invested in use cases and making things helpful for people. Do you have some of these things in your head too of like interesting categories that people are using ngrok for that maybe, don't always get surfaced as much as we would like, or just, like just not as obvious as local host tunnel or API gateway or things like that?
Yeah, I'll always love finding new and interesting use cases. Just off the top of my head, like some of the more memorable ones that I remember are we have someone in South America that is running ngrok on farming equipment. And so what they're doing is the name of the company escapes me, but they have ngrok on farming equipment that's automated and roaming around the fields, and sending all of the data back through ngrok to the cloud. So I thought that was really interesting setup. Um, I know it's early morning over in California, but it's 5 o'clock somewhere. So there's another company that kind of popular in the restaurant industry is you can order a drink and you actually pour it yourself at your own table. And the mechanisms inside that the tap to pour your drink is sending metrics back to the cloud, and that is also using ngrok. So yeah, I always think about that when I'm out at a restaurant. How that data is getting back to the cloud. Um,
Very cool.
the so those ones are always interesting. Kind of unique use cases that are fun. I have a tendency to prefer like a lot of the IoT use cases that pop up. A lot of people doing experiments and trying to figure out how to get connectivity in remote places. And I think the fact that ngrok runs on so many different platforms and can be configured to run on such a small fingerprint or footprint of devices is really powerful. So that's always exciting for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this was a discussion that I had with Niji last week about this balance of being like ngrok is very opinionated in a certain way of like it collapses a lot of networking, like DNS, domains, certificate management, all of these really complicated things into a really simple package, but also is highly configurable, which makes it adaptable to all these different use cases. Like clearly, having stuff running at a car wash or at a bar or on a tractor, like you're going to require different, you're going to need to tweak how ngrok is working to make that like, work for your application. But it is very much, adaptable to all those different things. And that's always super cool.
Yeah, and I think when anytime kudos to all the entrepreneurs out there who are building businesses and starting things. And like a lot of these businesses are running in these bespoke niche areas of industry or verticals or unique spaces that very few people have knowledge of, right? But the problem is when you're starting those companies, you're starting in these bespoke industries. When you start a business, you have to learn a bunch of different things, right? Not just your specialty, or you need to bring on a bunch of people that know these different areas. And networking is no different, right? Networking is a huge component of any of these startups that are spinning up. And what ngrok allows you to do is kind of remove that from the equation, right? When you're building your software, when you're building your business, when you're building your application, you assume that everything is sitting right next to each other and everything can always talk to each other because that's what ngrok unlocks, right? And you can layer on enterprise grade security on top of all of that stuff without having to hire and build out a security team. You get that for built into your networking layer, which is really powerful. Again, just takes that off of the plate so that you have more time to focus on building your actual business, building your bespoke, your actual product, which is really powerful for our users.
Yeah, I think that's a great like message to kind of come back to in all the use cases that Jack had talked about. Trying to preserve a language, like that is their priority, not, learn, trying to set up networking and doing all this stuff like that. That is, tertiary at best to what they're actually trying to do. And yeah, ngrok is, making that possible. So that's super cool. Awesome. Again, if people have questions, feel free to answer them or ask them in the chat here. I've got one question here that was asked in the registration that I think is interesting and kind of quite connected to the discussion we've been having so far. It came from Nicholas, and it was he was asking local versus production and how to switch back and forth efficiently between the two. And this one kind of sparked something in my brain when I read it. And I think there could be a piece of this that a technical piece that I'm missing. But I think kind of the core of the question comes down to like, okay, I've set up ngrok, I set up the agent, it's running, on my local machine, my laptop, wherever I'm doing my development work. I'm able to, create an endpoint for that so other people can access it. And then it's like, now what? Like, I need to take this to production. What am I supposed to do? Like, what do I need to change within my configuration that allows me to go to production? And I think that there's this kind of misconception that you have to do a ton of stuff to make that happen. And in reality, you don't really need to. And that's probably me personally, my favorite, like kind of built-in feature or magic of ngrok. Um, I have a bit of it's not a demo, but I kind of like a diagram kind of picture thing that I can build out. But Russ and Jack, maybe if you two want to talk about this like development to production with ngrok thing for a minute while I get set up for like a minute or two, and then like I'll kind of showcase how I perceive this thing and how you can kind of like simplify how you think about this approach.
Yeah. I think just going back to the one of the examples, of this customer who started out manually provisioning access, right, in a kind of a more of a scrappy, local based way, right, like agent based way of manually spinning up a new EC2 instance for every customer. That they started out in a less scalable way, like arguably like not a production way, even though they wanted to take their app to production. And over time, right, like the team was exploring the use of APIs to scale that provisioning and management of like ngrok tunnels and EC2 instances, right? Like, so, for me, I think it's to your point, Joel, there isn't really this big division there, right? Where it's like you can start out with a really local manual process and get to a point where you're dynamically creating, managing, and then tearing down tunnels based on customer demand using ngrok's API, right? So you can start pointing to the API as opposed to so you migrate from more of the agent-based to more of the API-based solution. You don't really have to change anything about your environment. You could be pointing the same service just at a different direction. But
Yeah,
Russ,
and I think that the interesting thing is the goal at ngrok, again, one of our key tenets, our core tenets, is really to be everywhere and fit into your processes and your stack the way that you'd like. And so, we do that a bunch of different ways. And most of our users will experience ngrok initially through our standalone agent binary. Download that and run that online and one line command and get access to their service. And that's great. We have customers that take that, deploy those agents as sidecars into production with production configuration flags. It's the same binary that you're using on your dev test. They're deploying that into production. They're deploying that to thousands of their customers, and that works great for them. For others, that once they see and understand that ngrok can do the things that it can do using the standalone agent, they discover our embedded agent SDKs, right? And so maybe they're building a Go application or a Rust application or a JavaScript application, Python application, and they realize that you can actually import ngrok library directly into your application and build it so that when your application starts, ngrok starts, and you have that connectivity. And what you're doing is you're actually bundling you as the application developer are telling the world how to access your application, regardless of where it's running, right? And you can do that in the same way that you do it in standalone web apps. Normally, you have a .dev configuration and you have a .prod configuration, depending on the environment that you're running it in. You can add ngrok into those configurations and configure your endpoints and your security and all of that sort of stuff, depending on the environment you're in, right? And that means that you can take your application and make it truly portable, right? You start that application on your local laptop or desktop. You get the same connectivity to your dev URL. You take that same bundle and you drop it into AWS or Alibaba Cloud or Oracle Cloud, wherever. You get that same connectivity. You take that agent and you drop it into a Kubernetes cluster running inside of a some data whatever somewhere in the middle of nowhere, as long as it's got inbound access to the or outbound access to the internet, you get the same connectivity, which is really powerful. So again, just another we so you start with the agent, understand the power of ngrok, move into the agent SDKs, maybe you build it into your application. That's great. Maybe you take a look and say, hey, I'm actually running my application inside of Kubernetes. Well, ngrok has a solution for that as well, right? The Kubernetes operator is the best way to manage ngrok inside of your Kubernetes cluster. Again, if you're building dev test and you're running K3D or Minikube or anything else on your local desktop, you install the ngrok operator, you configure it, you then take that same configuration and drop it into an EKS cluster or any other Kubernetes cluster, and it works the exact same way regardless of infrastructure. You're not provisioning public IPs for your Kubernetes nodes. You're not relying on external load balancers. It's the same configuration. You're running dev test on your local machine. You're probably tweaking some URLs because I don't think anybody wants your dev test URLs out there in the public. But other than that, it's the same software running in production, which is really powerful.
Yeah, awesome. I'm gonna share my screen here and kind of do a bit of diagramming magic here and see if I can help illustrate one of the exact use cases that Russ just mentioned here, which was like you are, on your laptop developing an app or an API service, whatever that is. You've installed the ngrok agent and you've configured it to be like, your service is running on port 4321 and you want to make it available at dev.example.com. You've got ngrok, creates that endpoint, makes it publicly available, and then you can test that out. People can access it externally. You can configure webhooks, whatever kind of testing functionality you're looking for. So like that's great. You've got it running really nicely in a development environment, but what do you do for production? And one of the things that Russ had mentioned was like people just kind of take this same thing and they take it over to an EC2 instance. They have their app running. They have the ngrok agents running alongside it as expected. And really all that they need to do, you have this like configuration, and kind of all you need to do is change that URL flag. So then you're just like example.com. You don't really need to do anything else to then, like that provisions a new, obviously these are going to be different, based on your actual domains, but that would, provision a new public endpoint at sort of the production quote unquote endpoint and make that available to anybody who wants to access your production site. And what's cool about this is like you can also add into your configuration all sorts of traffic policy. And again, those are going to work the same on your development environment as a production environment. So you can test things out. And then if it works locally, great, like let's ship it to production. So that could be like adding, removing, editing headers. That could be compression, like even authentication, if you want to experiment with that. Jot validation. We have other, methods of authentication coming soon. Could be denying traffic based on IPs, redirects, rewrites, all these different things. That same configuration file will carry over and work basically the same on both. And then, you get all of the benefits of the ngrok network, regardless of what environment you're working with. You get the GSLB, load balancing, DDoS protection, everything good like that. So hopefully that kind of illustrates like diagrams always look more complicated, I feel like, than the idea behind them. But hopefully that kind of illustrates like how you can take this single configuration, single setup, and make it production ready without having to like change everything and have built about networking and load balancing and all these really complicated pieces. Yeah, doesn't look like there's any questions about that, but yeah, that's fantastic. Let's keep rolling here. Again, if people have questions, feel free to drop them in here. Otherwise, we'll kind of keep rolling with some of the questions that people have asked ahead of time. We got an interesting one from Akarsh about handling high traffic applications or bursts in traffic, and if there's limitations that folks should be aware of. Russ, I feel like you might be a great person to talk on this as well about like high traffic volume, like what, I know that we've produced content lately about our data platform and the sheer number of events that, kind of pass through our system every hour, every day. There's billions of events and tons of traffic. And yeah, like, is burst traffic an issue if you're using ngrok in production? Is that something you need to reconfigure different agents depending on, how much traffic it's going to produce in a minute or an hour?
Yeah, I'll talk about a couple different layers that we have at ngrok for how we handle large volumes of traffic, right? So at the very edge of our network, we have a global firewall that we maintain ourselves, and that protects our entire platform against DDoS attacks and anything like that. That's managed by our ops team, and when we find nefarious IPs that are just destroying our infrastructure, we route them somewhere else to maintain kind of like service levels for all of our customers. You'd be surprised how many DDoSes show up on our platform and are handled kind of silently behind the scenes for all of our customers. The next level is as the traffic comes into ngrok, right? It routes through to the account level. All of our accounts have predefined limits configured for them. Obviously, our free tier has different limits than some of our paid offerings. Those limits are measured in requests per second and connections per second on those type of meters. And those are, I'll be honest, like those are set pretty generously. from what I've seen, especially for HTTP traffic that tends to reuse connections. We don't see a lot of people hitting those unless something strange is happening with their account. In terms of once the traffic gets to your account, then it routes through to your we handle a lot of all of the traffic manipulation at our edge and our servers, but eventually the traffic has to route to your servers through the ngrok agent to your upstream, right? And the ngrok agent itself can run multiple tunnels. I think by default on the free tier, one agent can run 3 tunnels. On paid tiers, you can run 20 tunnels per agent. And those agents can route to, that means that they can route to at least 20 different upstreams, right? It does that by muxing all the connections through a single dedicated connection to our cloud, right? And as everyone understands, as you shove more things through a pipe, right, eventually you run out of space in that pipe and it slows down. And so as you start to see more traffic, I probably wouldn't recommend running major websites like Reddit or Wikipedia through like a single ngrok agent. We have the ability to load balance that traffic across multiple agents, so that you can handle large amounts of traffic with no problem. I will say, like with the ngrok agent, the way it runs, and you're running 1 or 2 tunnels, it can handle a pretty large amount of traffic. But if you're worried about big traffic spikes, you can load balance that across any number of agents, and keep that low. That also, again, like that also would help your upstreams, because you would then run multiple upstreams, which would then be able to handle that traffic bursts as well, right? If you're worried about people spamming your service, we obviously have a bunch of configurable protections, such as rate limiting or mostly rate limiting, and that allows you to configure rate limiting per IP or per user agent, and IP per session, per whatever you want. So you can actually stop users from bombarding your service, and make sure you maintain a level of quality for your customers as well. So just some of the ways that we handle traffic bursts at every level. I would say, like, if you're concerned about large amounts of traffic coming through your system, reach out to us so we can help you design it so that you can do all that stuff. So, just for example, right? Like we run our own ngrok service to host our own dashboard app. So all of our millions of developers that are accessing ngrok are going through ngrok to access the dashboard, right? And so we can handle large amounts of traffic through our agent with no problem.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And we got a question, Russ, while you were talking about from Precious Kelvin here about, is ngrok a deployment web application or just for testing, like I heard, without deployments? And I think that kind of goes back to the diagram that I was showing and the explanation that Russ, you had made, and I was trying to kind of reinforce, is that I wouldn't say that there's, like, if you're thinking about a deployment for web applications, like more like a hosting service like Vercel, or all these different like hosts that just kind of take static HTML and make them available, like it can certainly do that. Like that is, and it makes that easy, but it's not 100% like the same use cases as something like that. But absolutely,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
ngrok is not just for testing. So
Mm,
as we tried to explain a couple different times, to actually, we'll shout it from the rooftops. ngrok
yeah.
is known for testing, but millions of people, like millions of users going through ngrok, run production web services that are up 24/7 with multiple nines of uptime guarantees. So it can handle your production traffic with no problem. It can also handle your test traffic, but more importantly, it can handle your production traffic. There's no need to jump to a different tool when you want to switch from testing to production. You can stick with ngrok, and we will scale as large as your application can
Mm,
scale. So no
mhm.
worries there.
Yeah. And whether or not, like if you're developing a web app and it, requires a web server in front of that, and you want to use ngrok to kind of route through the web server and into the app, or if your app can handle and respond with without that, like we can, ngrok can work around all those different kind of deployment, and production level configurations and infrastructures that you might be working with. We've got just a few minutes here, and I want to, I kind of prepared this beefy demo, and I think I want to get into it, and I'm gonna hope that the demo gods will work with me here. But we got a question from Alexander in the registration form that I feel like is one that, again, it's kind of like ngrok is not just for testing. Like the more that we can shout this from the rooftops, like the better. And the question was that he got different answers, opinions, or rumors about this particular feature functionality, which was, can I set up two tunnels with different ports for the same domain or IP address, and whether that's like possible with the free and paid plans. And I think we get this question a lot, or we get this kind of confusion around like, I want to host multiple discrete services on the same host name, the same domain name, and like, how do I route traffic to different places? Like, how do do I set up multiple tunnels? Like, how does all this work? And yeah, I want to kind of demo a bit of like some of the new functionality that's available within ngrok, and kind of just explain how some of that works. So hopefully these shells are big enough for folks to see. If not, I will open up the chat, and I'm sure someone will let me know that it is way too small. But you can, like, just to clear the air on that rumor or that confusion, like you can route traffic to two different services on the same host name or domain name. And that's whether you've brought a branded one to ngrok and set up the DNS, or if it's an ngrok domain that you've reserved, and the ones that are .ngrok.app or .ngrok.pizza, all of that, the options available to you. What you can't do is specify a port while you're setting up an agent endpoint, which would kind of look like this. If you tried to do port 3000, you're going to get an error and saying that's an invalid port for reserved domains, and the only port available is 443. So at that point, you're probably wondering, well, if I can only, take traffic in from a single port at 443, how do I make sure that, traffic that I want to go to, service A and service B are routed appropriately? And until quite recently, that was kind of difficult with ngrok without some like kind of like nuanced configurations and things that required a little bit more setup. But it's gotten a lot easier just within the last couple of weeks with some new primitives with internal endpoints and traffic policies. So I have a really basic Node application here that just is kind of mocking a API service and returns JSON in response to any request. And I can start that up with Node, and then I can start up a second version of that. We're kind of masquerading as having two different discrete services here, and they're running on different ports. We can head over to a different tab, and I can now create a internal endpoint for this first service here that's running on port 4000. We're going to call that API A. And so we can create this internal endpoint. And you can see here that we have this internal endpoint. And fortunately, my screen is a little too small, but if you could see that, it would be forwarding to localhost port 4000. So you might be thinking like, okay, how do I access that? Like, surely I can just, curl API A dot internal, and it's going to, it doesn't work. Okay. Internal endpoints within ngrok can only receive traffic from a specific traffic policy action, which is called forward internal. And so you might feel like this is kind of limiting you actually, like before you just went from making local services available to a public endpoint, and the tunneling just worked, it was great. But this, what looks like a limitation now, is actually kind of the reason why this setup is so powerful. And so I can show you kind of how to set up these internal endpoints to actually receive the traffic that you're looking for. So I have a traffic policy file here, and it has a single rule here, which says I want to take any HTTP request and I want to forward it to API.internal, which is that internal endpoint that I already created. If I create the endpoints, I'll create a second, agent public endpoint here. And we'll kind of route this to office hours routing dot joelhans@xyz, my go-to domain, and then we'll specify the traffic policy file, and that we'll use forward internal. So we'll start that up. And again, you can't quite see, I don't know if I can make this bigger and Zoom will follow me. Oh my goodness. I've done something. Okay, I hit something that I did not mean to hit. But you can see here we've got this public endpoint available. And I don't know, let's see what happens when we curl that. So we get a response, that's fantastic, but like from where is this response coming? Like that's not 100% clear at this point. If we head back to our agents, we can see that we actually got this response from API A, which means that, the request came in through our public endpoint, was routed to API internal, which was then finally routed to localhost port 4000. So we successfully made one of our two API services available to the public internet on this single host name, which means we're kind of halfway done. So what I can do now is show another traffic policy. What did I call it here? Yeah, route path. And this is pretty similar to the first one, but we've added one piece here, which is an expression. And we're saying that if the request, the sort of URL of the request starts with /a, then we want to route it to our internal endpoint. If I start up ngrok again, using that, we can go back and curl this endpoint using /a. We get a response, and now we can see that we are still getting the response from API A. So like we've still got that set up. That's working fantastic. Now, if we go to, let's say, /b, where is this one coming from? Oh, we can see that now we are accessing API B, which is in turn running, it's running on port 4001. It's a separate service. So we've successfully routed traffic on a single host name to two services that are running on this system. And we could even take that a little bit further with another traffic policy where we have the same setup at the beginning, but we also add a custom response, which is a 404 response. We're just saying, like, you can't find this API service, you're on an incorrect route. And what we're saying here is that if the path of the request does not start with /b, that's why we're using that exclamation point there to negate that expression, then we want to give this custom response. But what happens if it does start with /b? Like what happens in that case? So let's do this one last time. I did not want to add more than one. And we can try, let's try what happens if we do a test. Great, it's going to API A as expected. If we do /b test, that's showing up at API B. And I don't know, let's try /c test. Oh, we're hitting our 404. And if we try any other route here, we're going to hit our 404. And that just kind of makes sure that traffic stays where it should and kind of sets up this routing and makes it a little bit more robust than what we had. And this I think is like, this is kind of where a lot of, ngrok is headed with our endpoints and internal endpoints, cloud endpoints, which are coming soon. I wish I could talk about cloud endpoints here, but I think that's like maybe for next time, or maybe for January when we're really ready with those. But just wanted to kind of showcase one of the many ways that you can solve this problem of I have many services. I want them all on a single host name. Like how do I make that happen? And the cool thing is that I showed one way, which was routing by path. You could also do this based on subdomains. You could do this based on different headers that you attach to requests. The options are kind of unlimited. And Jen very helpfully just dropped the blog post to talking about internal endpoints and how to set those up with different routing topologies. And if you're curious about that, how you would set that up for your own services, that's going to be the place to go to kind of get some examples and some direction on how to do it yourself. And I will also drop in the chat our new API gateway guide, which will walk you through setting this up end to end using an example API service, kind of like what I did here as well. So that's a pretty, like meaty, complex demo. I would love to hear if there's any questions about it. If there's places that are, that need a little bit more explanation. But we can always take some of these discussions, offline and yeah, we have a number of places to be able to do that. So I'm not seeing any questions. And we're kind of almost at an hour here. So I'm thinking we should probably just kind of bring this session of office hours to a close. I'm going to share my screen one last time here. If there are, that did not work. Well, I was going to share a little slide about like how you can get in touch with us if you have questions, but that seems to be not working. The demo gods let me get through the demo without errors, but not just as something simple as sharing a screen. So give me one moment and I will bring some of those things up. And Jack and Russ, thanks so much for joining me for this one. Yeah, I feel like we got to kind of dig into some really interesting use cases and talk about that, like, reiterate some of those things about like ngrok is not just a tunneling service. We are ready and willing to help you get all the way into production. And yeah, really appreciate the insights.
Yeah,
So
always happy to chat.
Yeah,
yeah,
thanks.
absolutely.
Thanks for having
So
us.
we've got I just put in the chat our community repo, which is at github.com/ngrok/ngrok. That's the great place to ask questions, file bugs, whatever you have. Russ is in there all the time, helping people through issues, or we've done some really great, like Russ has done some really great things there of like identifying a bug and getting it resolved, I don't know, within 24 hours, maybe even faster than that. We've had some issues with like time zone displays, and there's a couple other things. So if you are, struggling with an issue, something with setting up your agents and it doesn't seem like it should be as complicated as it is, or something is, you're probably finding a bug, and that will be the place to get in touch with our team and get that solved. Or if you have a feature request, an excellent place to do that. And in the future, you can always find information about our upcoming office hours sessions on our website. That's ngrok.com/resources/office hours. And I'm trying to copy this into here, and it is really just not letting me. It's not letting me. Anyways, that's where you can find it. And yeah, I appreciate everybody joining me today, and yeah, it's fantastic. And we'll talk to you next month.